For a long time, I thought my life would be just that, a cycle of sadness, despair, and loneliness. I lived in a large mansion, surrounded by luxuries that were supposed to make me happy, but which actually suffocated me. My name is Amelia, and my marriage to Henry, a powerful and influential man, was a gilded cage. On the outside, everything seemed perfect, but on the inside, it was a silent nightmare. I was stuck with a man who didn't love me, he just used me. And I wonder now, how did I put up with it for so long? It wasn't love, it was fear. Fear of leaving, fear of trying, fear of being free. But fate is curious, isn't it? It always finds unexpected ways to surprise us. That's when Theo came into my life. He was the new bodyguard Henry had hired. At first, he was just another serious, discreet face who was there to do his job, or so I thought. He didn't say much, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't decipher. He seemed to see beyond the facade I showed the world. It was as if he knew I was suffocating. And little by little, that silent presence began to bring me something I hadn't felt for years: hope. However, my life has never been simple. I should have known that any spark of light would be marked by shadows. It all happened very quickly. I remember standing in one of the halls of the mansion, looking out of the window as I thought about how my life was stuck in a cycle of unhappiness. That's when Theo rushed in. His expression was different, more tense, more urgent. He came up to me, held my arms gently, and for the first time I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. But it wasn't fear of him, it was fear for me. Amelia, try to stay calm. I don't have much time to explain everything now, but trust me. And above all, be safe, he said, in that voice that was firm but carried a hidden sweetness. My heart raced. I didn't know what was happening, but something inside me told me to trust him. Before I could say anything, a man entered the room. He was wearing a vest similar to Theo's. I didn't know him, but it was clear that they were together on something bigger. Secret mission? Betrayal? I didn't know, but my heart told me that my life was about to change forever. Theo, or whoever he was, gave the other man a firm order: protect her and take her away from here. His words sounded like an alarm. My body froze, but my heart wanted to scream. Please don't hurt yourself. I don't want you to suffer, I begged, with tears in my eyes. He looked at me with a determination I'll never forget. I'll be fine. Now go with him, and quickly. I should have gone without hesitation, but before I left, I said something that seemed to burn inside me. Henry, he's taken important documents out of the safe. He's nervous, more than usual. That's not good. It's dangerous. Theo agreed, as if that information was more important than I could imagine. And so I was taken away. But deep down, I knew I was leaving a part of myself behind. As the other man led me away from the mansion, shots began to echo off the walls. The sound was deafening. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Each shot was like a knife slicing through the air, and I didn't know if Theo, or rather Philippe, as I would find out later, was all right. Chaos took over, and I could only pray that he would come out alive. Later, I discovered the truth. Theo wasn't just a bodyguard. He was Philippe, a secret agent, and he was there to investigate Henry. My husband, the man I thought I knew, was involved in something much worse than I could have imagined. He was part of a criminal human trafficking network and had embezzled money from dangerous figures. Everything around me was a lie, and I was just a piece in his game. Philippe, with a courage I'll never forget, stood up to everything and everyone in that mansion. He neutralized Henry with frightening precision. It was as if he was used to danger, but I knew that behind that coldness, there was a man who cared. He managed to capture Henry and his men, ending the immediate threat. Henry was taken to hospital, seriously injured, but alive enough to face a fair trial. And that's how it all began. I, who thought I would never be able to escape, was now free. Free from the man who manipulated me, free from a life of lies. But at the same time, I was full of questions and uncertainties. Who was Philippe really? How did he feel about me? Would I be able to start again? I didn't know, but one thing was certain: my life would never be the same again. When everything finally calmed down, I felt like I was waking up from a nightmare. Henry was seriously injured, but alive, being taken away to face a trial that seemed so far removed from our facade reality. That world of luxury and perfect appearances that I knew so well. I, on the other hand, was put under protection. The police and agents wanted to know everything I knew, and it was at that moment that I realized how much my whole life had been controlled. I didn't know much, but the little I did know, like the code to the safe that Henry always guarded so zealously, turned out to be crucial. Inside that safe was irrefutable evidence. Documents detailing illicit transactions, embezzlement, and links to a criminal network that I didn't even know existed. For years, I had lived next door to a man who did terrible things that went beyond what I could imagine. I just pretended to be happy, trying to survive one day at a time. During the interrogations, I told him everything, every detail, every suspicion that I had never verbalized. It was as if I was venting years of pain, years of fear. And when it was all over, when they finally told me I was free to go, I just didn't know what to do. Free. That word echoed in my mind like something surreal. It's funny how, when you finally get what you wanted so much, you don't know how to deal with it. I decided I needed some time. Philippe, or Theo, as I still called him in my mind, suggested that I go to a hotel, rest, recover from everything. But that didn't seem right. I needed something deeper. I needed to return to my origins, to the place where I knew I would be welcomed. So I went to my parents' house. When I got there, I felt a mixture of relief and pain. It was like going back to the place where I was just Amelia, the girl who looked after birds in the garden and dreamed of the future. My parents welcomed me with open arms, but their faces were marked by surprise and concern. They believed I was happily married. How ironic, isn't it? I had become so good at hiding the truth that even the people who loved me most believed the lie. I hugged them tightly, and for the first time in a long time I cried. I cried like a child. I told them everything. I told them about the abuse, the years of isolation, the constant fear, and finally, how my life had been turned upside down by Henry's arrest. I saw tears in my mother's eyes, but they weren't just tears of sadness. There was also relief. She held my face in her hands and said, "You've come back to us, my child. That's what matters now." I spent the next few days trying to reconnect with myself. I went back to the garden where I used to spend hours when I was younger. It was a simple space, but full of life. I would sit near the birds that came to eat in the trees and wonder, do they recognize me? Could it be that deep down, I'm still that girl who dreamed of flying high, free like them? But the truth was that, as much as I tried to feel at peace, something still bothered me. Philippe. I couldn't get him out of my head. Where was he? What was he doing? Was he all right? He had risked so much for me, and yet he seemed so far away. I knew he had a dangerous job, but deep down I wanted answers. Who was he really? That's when I received the invitation. One day, while I was in the garden, a messenger arrived with a discreet envelope. Inside, there was just a short note, but every word seemed to burn. "Meet me tomorrow, at the agency. Philippe." My heart raced. It was as if my whole body had been seized by a current of anticipation and nervousness. The next day, I prepared as if I were going to an important event. Every detail seemed crucial. When I arrived at the agency, the place was full of people who always seemed to know exactly what they were doing. I felt out of place, but with every step, something inside me told me that this moment was important. And then, there he was. Philippe, or Theo, or maybe both. He was standing at the end of a corridor with that serious look I already knew so well. When our eyes met, it was as if everything around me disappeared. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I had to say something. "So you're not Theo, right?" I asked, trying to sound confident but my voice coming out a little shaky. He smiled. Not that easy, casual smile, but a smile that seemed to carry the weight of everything we had experienced together. "Actually, my name is Philippe," he said sincerely. "But you already know that, don't you?" I couldn't look away. It was as if we were seeing each other for the first time, but at the same time, as if we already knew each other deeply. He held out his hand and I took it. A simple gesture, but so full of meaning that it felt like the whole world was focused on that moment. "Thank you," I said at last, my voice full of emotion. "For everything." He didn't answer immediately. He just squeezed my hand lightly, as if to say, without words, that he was there for me. We left the agency together, but he insisted that I go and rest. Philippe always seemed to know what I needed, even when I didn't. He suggested a hotel, but I explained that I was staying at my parents' house. He agreed, understandingly, and took me there. Before I got out of the car, he said something that stuck in my mind. "You deserve to live, Amelia. Not just survive, but really live. Don't forget that." I looked at him, and at that moment I knew that my life had changed forever. After that conversation with Philippe, something inside me began to change. His words echoed in my mind over and over again. "You deserve to live, Amelia. Not just survive, but really live." I wasn't sure what living meant to me, but the idea of finding out seemed exciting and frightening at the same time. I spent a few days at my parents' house, trying to get used to the freedom, but the truth was that I didn't know what to do with it. Freedom, for someone who has spent years in prison, can be as frightening as prison itself. Then, a few days later, Philippe came to see me again. He had taken a short break from his job, something rare, he told me, and said he wanted to spend a day with me. He wanted to show me that there was more to life than just surviving. I hesitated at first. Accepting this invitation meant leaving the safe cocoon I had created at my parents' house. But something in Philippe's determination made me say yes. He asked me to trust him. Without revealing too much, he took me to a park. When we got there, I was confronted with a scene that seemed straight out of a movie. A colorful tablecloth spread out under a large tree, with a picnic basket full of fruit, sandwiches, and cakes. The place was incredibly quiet, with the gentle sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the trees and the distant singing of birds. It was simple, but magical. "I thought you needed a day of your own, a day to forget everything," Philippe said with a soft smile. I looked at him, trying to understand how someone who seemed so serious and focused on his mission was able to do something so simple, yet so meaningful. "Thank you. I don't know what to say," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "Don't say anything. Just enjoy it," he replied. And that's exactly what I did. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to relax. As we ate, we talked about silly, simple things. He told me some stories about his childhood, how his mother was a strong woman who taught him to always fight for what was right. I, on the other hand, shared some memories of when I was young and dreamed of traveling the world, getting to know different cultures and going on adventures. It was strange to remember these dreams that I had buried so deep. After the picnic, he took me to explore the park. We ran around like kids, laughed on the swings, and even went up on a Ferris wheel. It's amazing how these simple moments can make you feel like you're really alive. As the sun began to set, we sat down on a bench, side by side. The sky was tinged with orange and pink, and the world seemed so peaceful. "Why are you doing this for me?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. He looked at me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the sunset. "Because you deserve it, Amelia. You've spent so long living for someone else, trapped in a life that wasn't yours. You deserve to experience what it's like to be free. And if I can help you with that, even just a little, it's worth it." It was at that moment that I realized that Philippe wasn't just a good man. He was someone who really cared about me in a way that no one else ever had. In the days that followed, Philippe continued to encourage me to explore this new life. He took me to self-defense classes, something that, at first, I thought was unnecessary, but which turned out to be a powerful experience. I learned that I no longer needed to fear anyone. Every blow I practiced, every move I learned, made me feel stronger, more confident. One of the most memorable experiences was when he took me to a place where we could parachute. I thought he was joking at first, but he was serious. "You need to feel what freedom is, Amelia, and nothing compares to that," he said. Fear almost paralyzed me, but somehow his presence gave me courage. When I finally jumped, I felt something I had never felt before, a mixture of adrenaline and peace. It was as if I was leaving behind all the invisible chains that held me back. Each new experience with Philippe made me rediscover parts of myself that I thought were lost forever. But at the same time, I knew I was starting to fall in love with him, and that scared me. After everything I'd been through with Henry, I was afraid to open my heart again, afraid of getting hurt, afraid of losing control. Philippe seemed to understand this. He never pushed, never forced anything. He was just there, patient, waiting for me to be ready. Then one day, he took me to meet his mother. I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would be something formal, perhaps even awkward. But to my surprise, his mother was exactly who I needed to meet at that moment. She was strong, independent, and had a sparkle in her eyes that seemed to say that nothing in the world could bring her down. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Amelia. Philippe talks about you a lot," she said, with a warm smile that made me feel instantly at ease. We spent hours talking. She told me stories of how she raised Philippe on her own and how she always taught him to fight for what was right. I realized that he had inherited his strength and kindness from her. That evening, as we drove home, Philippe asked me what I thought of her. "I loved it. Now I understand where you got your strength from," I replied. He smiled, but there was something else in his gaze, something that seemed to say that he was happy that I was starting to open up. And so, day by day, I was rebuilding myself. I still didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. After that night when I met Philippe's mother, something inside me began to solidify. I felt that, for the first time in a long time, I had found a balance. It wasn't just because of Philippe, but also because I was learning to trust myself again. Still, there was one question I couldn't avoid. Was I ready to love again? Philippe never pressured me. He seemed to understand my silences, my fears, even the barriers I still put up around us. But his patience, oh, it was so different from the control Henry exerted over me. Philippe gave me space, but at the same time made me feel that I wasn't alone. And that's how, gradually, I began to allow myself to feel something for him, something real. One day, as we walked together through the countryside near my parents' house, he suddenly stopped and looked at me. His eyes had that intensity that I had already learned to recognize, but this time there was more. Something he had been holding back for a long time. "Amelia, I know you're building your life now. I know there are still things you need to overcome, but I want you to know that I'm here. No matter how long it takes, I'll be here. I don't want to rush anything or confuse your feelings. I just want you to know," he said, his voice firm, but with a vulnerability that touched me deeply. I didn't know what to say. His words hit something inside me that I was trying to ignore. I was in love with him. Yes, I knew that now, but admitting it out loud seemed to give this feeling a weight that I still didn't know if I could carry. So I just smiled and held his hand. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was the best I could give at that moment. Over the following months, my life continued to change. Philippe encouraged me to follow my dreams, and it was he who gave me the final push to open my own psychology practice. "You have a powerful story, Amelia. You can help so many women who have been through what you've been through," he said to me one evening as we chatted on the veranda of my parents' house. I knew he was right. My greatest fear had always been that my pain would be in vain, that everything I had endured would mean nothing. But somehow, turning my experience into something that could help other people seemed to make sense of it all. With dedication and care, I began to plan my office. I chose every detail, from the soft colors of the walls to the comfortable and welcoming furniture. I wanted to create a space where women could feel safe, where they could open up and begin to heal. When the office was finally ready, Philippe was there beside me, holding my hand as I turned the key in the door for the first time. "You did it," he said with a proud smile. "Not alone," I replied, looking at him in a way that said more than any words could. But life is never that simple, is it? Just as I began to feel comfortable with my new routine, a shadow from the past appeared. I was called to testify again in Henry's case. The trial was approaching, and the authorities needed my testimony to ensure that he was convicted. I knew it was necessary, but it brought up all the fears I had been trying to put behind me. Philippe noticed my anxiety before I even mentioned anything. He always seemed to know what I was feeling. "You're not alone in this, Amelia. I'll be there, even if you don't see me. I'll always be there," he said, with that firmness that made me believe that everything would be all right. On the day of my testimony, I was shaking. When I entered the courtroom, I saw Henry for the first time since his arrest. He looked older, weaker, but he still had that cold, calculating look that made me feel small. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't be able to speak, but then I remembered Philippe's words. "You're not alone." I took a deep breath and told her everything. I talked about the abuse, about the control, about the nights I cried alone, about the documents in the safe. When I'd finished, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from me. Henry was convicted, and I could finally say that I was free. Really free. After that day, something changed in me. I was no longer the broken woman Henry had controlled for so long. I was Amelia, a strong, independent woman, ready to live, and I knew I didn't want to live alone. That evening, as Philippe and I walked through the same field where he had confessed his feelings to me months before, I stopped and looked him in the eye. "Philippe, I have something to say, and I'm going to say it before I lose my nerve," I began, feeling my heart pounding. He frowned, worried. "What is it, Amelia?" "I love you," I said at once. "I'm afraid, yes. I'm afraid of getting hurt, afraid of losing you, but I can't pretend I don't feel it anymore." For a moment he was silent. Then a soft smile lit up his face, and he took my face in his hands. "I love you too, Amelia, and I promise I'll never make you feel trapped again." When he kissed me, I felt as if the whole world had disappeared. It was just me and him, two people who had faced so much but were finally finding happiness. Over the next few months, my practice flourished. Women began to seek my help, and each one reminded me of why I had chosen this path. Philippe remained by my side, supporting me every step of the way. He said I was the strongest person he knew, but the truth was that I was only strong because I knew he was there. The months that followed were the happiest, and at the same time, the most challenging of my life. My practice was thriving, and each new client represented a step towards something bigger. I wasn't just helping other women heal their wounds, I was also healing myself. Every story I heard, every breakthrough I saw, made me feel that finally my pain had found a purpose. But deep down, I knew that there were still parts of me that needed to be rebuilt. Philippe was a constant in my life. He never stopped supporting me, but he also knew when to give me space. He understood that, as important as he was to me, it was essential that I learn to be complete on my own. And I loved him all the more for that. Our relationship was built on trust, freedom, and respect, everything I'd never had before. One evening, while I was reviewing diaries and organizing upcoming appointments, Philippe came into the office with a different expression. He was carrying a box, and the smile on his face was one of those that keep secrets. "What's this?" I asked, curious, as he placed the box on my desk. "Open it and find out," he said, leaning back against the wall with his arms crossed. With trembling hands, I opened the box, and inside I found a pair of hiking shoes, a small backpack, and a folded map. I looked at it, confused. "You've been working hard, Amelia. Really hard. And I know that's important to you, but I think it's time you allowed yourself a break too. I want to take you somewhere special. Just the two of us. What do you think?" I laughed, surprised and thrilled at the same time. "Are you convincing me to take a vacation?" "I'm convincing you to live," he replied, with that smile that always made my heart race. A few days later, there we were, hiking along secluded trails in a mountainous region I had never heard of before. Philippe had chosen the spot carefully, as he always did. The landscape was breathtaking, mountains covered in dense forests, crystal clear streams running between the rocks, and a silence that seemed almost sacred. I felt like I was in another world, far from everything, far from the past. It was just me, him, and the nature around us. During the walk, we stopped at a viewpoint from where we could see the entire valley below. The wind was cold but invigorating, and the sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky orange and pink. Philippe took something out of his backpack and handed it to me. A small bottle of wine and 2 glass goblets. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" I asked, laughing. "I always think of everything," he replied with a mischievous smile. We sat side by side, watching the sunset as we toasted to freedom, love, and new possibilities. It was such a simple moment, but so perfect that I almost cried. "Do you know what I love most about you, Philippe?" I asked after a long silence. "What?" he asked, sounding genuinely curious. "You give me space to fly, but you're always there when I need to land." He looked at me with that gaze that seemed to see straight into my soul. "And I always will be, Amelia. Always." When we got back from that trip, I felt different, lighter, more connected with who I was and what I wanted for the future. It was then that I made an important decision to expand my work. I wanted to take my message of strength and overcoming beyond my office. I started planning lectures, writing articles, and even a book. Philippe supported me every step of the way. He was there to proofread my texts, listen to my ideas, and remind me that I had something valuable to share. And with each new project I completed, I felt like I was getting closer to the best version of myself. A year later, at a special event I organized for women who had survived abusive relationships, Philippe came up with something that changed everything. As I was wrapping up my speech and thanking everyone for coming, he came on stage. My heart started beating faster. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, taking the microphone. "I promise not to take up too much of your time, but I need to do something here and now." He turned to me, and I knew what was about to happen. "Amelia, you taught me what real strength means. You showed me that, even after everything you've been through, it's still possible to love, dream, and build something new. You're the most incredible person I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side." He knelt down and took a small box out of his pocket. "Amelia, will you marry me?" For a moment, the whole world stopped. I looked at him, at the man who had helped me rediscover who I was, who had given me the space and freedom I had always wanted, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, what the answer was. "Yes," I said, with tears in my eyes. The room erupted in applause and shouts of joy, and at that moment I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And so my story didn't end, but it really began. I was no longer just the woman who survived. I was Amelia, a woman who was free, strong, passionate, and ready to live to the full.